Hello everyone, my name's Sonia Dunlop. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor at SolarPower Europe, working for the Resource Platform. Welcome to this Resource Platform webinar on on-site versus off-site corporate sourcing. This webinar is going to focus really on the on-site options for corporate sourcing for companies wishing to buy renewable electricity, and is part of our awareness raising program here at the Resource Platform. So just a few words of introduction about the Resource Platform. The Resource Platform is an alliance of different associations working together to promote, to encourage the corporate sourcing of renewable energy. It was founded by SolarPower Europe, Wind Europe, the two solar and wind the Solar and Wind Energy Associations, RE100, the Global Alliance of Corporates who have committed to going 100% renewable, and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Within the Resource Platform, just a few words of introduction, we also have a steering committee of committed buyers and suppliers working with us to promote the corporate sourcing of renewable electricity. They include NL Green Power, Engie, Google, Iberdrola, Microsoft, RES, Amazon, IKEA, Danone, Novartis, BT, Facebook, and Heineken. And we're very grateful for their support. Just a few quick recap of the Resource Platform's objectives. Our objectives are to influence legislation at EU and national level to make it easier for companies to source their power from renewable sources, to raise awareness and educate stakeholders, educate new groups of buyers on the advantages of the corporate sourcing of renewable energy, and indeed this webinar is part of that, and to then facilitate business opportunities, to bring the buyers and the sellers together, to connect them and to make transactions in this market, in the European corporate sourcing market, faster, easier and cheaper. Our overall goal is to move from 100 buyers to 100,000 to really increase the number of buyers in the European corporate sourcing market. Every year, the Resource Platform at a European level has a big event, the Resource event. This year in 2019, it is going to be held again in Amsterdam on the 2nd and 3rd of October. So we hope to see you there. We've already sent out a save the date. And that is promising to be yet again a big event with almost 800 or more people coming together to really discuss the key topics and the key issues in the European corporate sourcing market. One quick practical issue before we get started. So during this webinar, you have the opportunity to ask questions. In order to do that, you just need to type your questions in the control panel, your GoToWebinar control panel on your screen. Just type your questions, and then we will put those questions in a Q&A to the speakers after each of their presentations. Okay, so today's speakers who are joining us for this focus on on-site corporate sourcing are Simon Gerard, who's the Director of Renewables and Clean Tech at Schneider Electric, Karol Gobzinski, who is the Climate and Energy Manager at IKEA, and Jochen Hauf, who is Head of Strategy and Energy Policy and Sustainability at BayWa Renewable Energy. Sorry for that delay. I now want to introduce our first speaker, who is Simon Gerard from Schneider Electric, who's going to be talking about how to build the internal business case for on-site corporate sourcing. So now I'm just going to hand over to Simon, and he's going to give us our first presentation. Simon, you have control of the slides. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Yes, my name is Simon Gerard. I'm a Director of Renewables at Schneider Electric ESS. And yeah, today I've been asked to talk to you about the on-site renewable generation options and the considerations that businesses need to think about when looking to take forward a project, and look specifically at some of these considerations under a PPA structure. So before we get started on that, just a brief introduction to Schneider Electric ESS. Schneider Electric ESS is a global energy services business that provides energy supply, demand, and sustainability services to over 6,000 clients at 600,000 locations across the world. We work with businesses to help them buy power more effectively, manage their risk, reduce on-site demand, report and reduce their carbon emissions in a planned way. And my role within that is to lead on some of the corporate advisory services that we offer. We're actually the leading advisory practice for corporate PPAs globally. We've advised on 100 corporate PPAs to date, totaling 6 gigawatts. And our clients include some of the world's leading brands, including some of the resource members. So we're currently acting on behalf of 60 clients looking to execute corporate PPAs across the globe at the moment. And my role is to help those clients determine and then implement their renewable energy sourcing strategy. So just before we get into the specifics of on-site, I thought I'd just recap on what the options that are available to businesses when they're looking to procure renewable energy. So the first and most straightforward is simply moving over to a green tariff. There's a very low barrier to entry to do this, and the number of suppliers offering options in this area is increasing all the time. Having said that, in most markets there is a premium for renewable power still. And you need to be sure, if you're using the green tariff option to help you move forward in your renewable energy target, that you are certain that the renewable certificates are bundled in with your tariff, so that you can use those for your reporting purposes. The next step is to look at continuing to buy from your existing supplier, but then look to enter into the certificates markets to buy up the remaining megawatt hours that you need to meet your renewable targets. So this is an option that's available across most jurisdictions, particularly the US, Europe, Australia, South America. So there are plenty of options in this area. However, the certificates market is seeing increasing price volatility, and we think that's down to a combination of growing corporate demand, some weather variations, and indeed some speculation and speculators in the market as well. So, but again, if you're looking to have a reportable renewable energy target, you do need to make sure that you're buying certificates that comply with whatever standard you've set up under. So whether that's an RE100 standard, you need to make sure that the certificates you buy are applicable for that jurisdiction, and you can actually report effectively under their criteria. The next phase is the bulk of what I'll be talking about today, which is on-site generation. This is usually forms a major part of any business's renewable strategy. It has the advantages of providing on-site direct reduction in energy costs to the site, so a lot of operational buy-in. Hopefully, it's obviously it's highly visible as a commitment to renewable energy, and it meets the additionality test as well. However, it can be hard to achieve scale, and you will be ultimately limited to what you can generate by the footprint of your sites. And I think it's typically anywhere between sort of 10 and 40% of on-site demand can be met using renewable energy options. And there are a wide range of ownership models available here, whether that's direct ownership, leasing, or looking to secure power under a PPA. And then the final option is offsite generation. This is usually a much larger utility scale. It's usually under a PPA structure, and there are a number of different variations there. So you either got a direct structure or a virtual PPA structure, something that I can go into more detail in the questions section potentially. It does meet, again, usually if it's a new build, will meet the additionality criteria, and it's usually an effective hedge against rising commodity and certificate volatility. So, but it is a long-term commitment to go for those types of projects. So the slide here is a typical approach that we see from our clients to enable them to meet their renewable energy goal. What we encourage all our clients to do is to pause and then establish a robust renewable energy strategy. So looking at the geographies, the estates, and then looking at the different technologies that are available to you. In our view, having a strategy first underpins any and the associated alignment and buy-in that you get with that underpins the successful rollout of a renewables plan. And what we see in stage one is that once you have your strategy, people then look to meet their targets through a combination of switching to green tariffs where appropriate, and then entering into the certificates markets. Whilst doing that, they can then assess their on-site options across the various jurisdictions that they're responsible for, but phase one is certainly tariffs and certificates in most cases. The next phase is then to start looking at implementation of an on-site strategy. Whilst doing that, looking at which jurisdictions you may want to look at off-site options for. And then as you move through into the higher levels of your renewable energy target, if you're aiming for something like 100%, in most cases you're going to need to have some off-site generation in your portfolio to enable you to get to 100%. But I'd suggest the key thing is to maximize on-site generation where you can. Buy certificates and then look at off-site generation. And then the final thing to say here is that this is a very dynamic market. So a continual review of each market and the technologies that you're looking at is something that we would recommend. Okay, so on-site PPAs. So the first thing to say is a PPA, or a power purchase agreement, is essentially an agreement between a generator and an off-taker. So in this case, the generator is a renewable energy generation station, and the off-taker being a corporate buyer. It's usually a long-term commitment, which enables the developer to finance their project. And you're typically looking at terms of in excess of 15 years for any new build projects. The way we would certainly recommend that you run an RFP process to ensure you get the best project and the best terms. So just to talk you through the different steps. So once you've done your RFP process, you sign a contract with a provider. They'll then come and do the installation and supply you power to the site. So any energy that's generated by the renewable generation station will go directly into the corporate facility, and there's usually a transfer of any certificates, green certificates, as part of that contract. So the system is usually sized to the appropriate load on site. But in the cases where there is any excess, then that power is spilled to the grid if the local grid will allow that. But the key thing is here that the project is still connected to the grid, so you can still purchase power from the grid, so there's no risk to the operational integrity of the site. But the outcome for the net impact of this is a reduction in site and energy costs. So and you're able to offset against your non-commodity costs, so your distribution and transmission costs under this model. So in terms of on-site options, well, we see that in most cases there are essentially two technologies that people that are appropriate for most sites: solar and wind. I think it's fair to say that solar is the most common technology in our experience, and you've got a number of options. So ground-mounted arrays on spare land within the footprint of the site, utilizing your available roof space. And increasingly, businesses are starting to look at what other land do they have available that they can potentially look at converting into a generation station. So we've just seen the completion of a large carport at the Bentley factory up in Crewe here in the UK. That's a great example of utilizing some additional space within the footprint, providing additional utility to both staff and any customers visiting the site, and it fits in very well with an electric vehicle charging strategy as well. On the wind side, we do see a small number of wind projects, but it's very, very specific. It doesn't offer the same options as solar does, it's fair to say. And you can see installations typically vary from 50 to 5 megawatts for solar, and anywhere up to 2.5 megawatts per turbine for on-site wind. So in terms of considerations, I'd suggest the things that businesses need to be focused on are looking at the project considerations first. So is planning required? Not always a requirement for solar, roof-mounted solar in particular, but ground-mounted and canopies probably will need planning. Certainly wind will need planning consent. What is the age of the roof that you're looking to install this system on? What is the length of what is the longevity of the site? How long does the business intend to be at this site? It's also important to look at making sure that you match the generation profile with the load on site. The developer will want to make sure the majority of the power that they are producing is consumed on site. Other things to consider are, can you connect to that site? What permissions do you need to connect a generation asset to your site? What is your electric vehicle and energy storage strategy? How does this impact on any on-site generation? Similarly, what are the energy efficiency projects that are being planned for the site? How does that affect your ability to take power on site? And then the other things to look at are sort of what subsidies are available, what tax incentives, are there any deadlines? What compliance criteria do you need to meet to secure those subsidies? And then the final piece would be around property rights. If you're bringing in a developer who's going to own an asset on your property, you're going to need to think about what type of lease arrangements the business is able to offer. Are you able to provide a generator with access to your site, to your roof, for potentially 15 years plus? So these are all the things that I'd suggest from a project perspective, need to be considered. From a PPA perspective, as I said before, the PPA is a long-term commitment, and with that, there are some risks that off-takers need to be aware of. Price is only one consideration. I've no doubt that people are being approached by developers offering very competitive prices. The technology costs are falling. We recommend that you need to consider some of the other risks around this. So how do you protect your business against the long-term risks associated with a PPA? And these are just some of the areas that we start to look at for clients. So market risks. So what happens if wholesale and retail prices fall during the term of this agreement? What happens if there's you've got low production output from your assets? We do a lot of third-party assessments and production projections on behalf of our clients. What happens if the developer goes bankrupt? So looking at the counterparty risk is a key part of making sure you've done your due diligence properly. If it's a ground mount project, or even a carport, or even a wind project, what are the development risks around that? Does the provider that you're looking to engage with have the relevant development expertise to take a project forward? Are they prepared to sign up to condition precedents, so that you can take a deal forward to your board for sign off, knowing that you've covered the business if the project doesn't get consent? And then finally, what are the operational and technology risks? What happens if the asset doesn't perform over the term of the PPA? What does that do to your exposure to market risk? So these are some of the areas that we would suggest that you need to consider when you're looking at a PPA. And then I think I'll perhaps just end on some reflections on what we see from the projects that our clients bring to us. I think we see most sustainability and energy projects fail to get through to actual completion due to internal misalignment. You've usually got a team which is usually somebody from sustainability or procurement looking to champion a project internally, but they've not managed to build consensus within the business. They've not managed to understand who within the business needs to have a say on whether this project can go forward. So we see that you certainly need to be involving finance, accounting, treasury, legal, and of course the estates and facilities team as early as you possibly can, to make sure that they understand the risks and are aligned and are able to sign off on a long-term commitment before you take the project forward for formal executive approval. And that brings me to the end of my slides. Hope that was clear, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Simon. That was a very informative presentation on the different options for corporates, and also on the different process internally within a corporate that the corporate needs to go through in order to sign this off. I just have one question for you from the audience. It's really zooming in on those property issues. Yeah. And just wanted to ask you, what's the difference? Some businesses own their buildings, some businesses rent their buildings. How does that have to be taken into account when a business is thinking about doing its corporate sourcing? Is it possible to do it in a rented building, and what are the considerations?
Yeah, it's a good question, and that's one of the things that we suggest that you explore in detail in the renewable energy strategy. What we find is that we've certainly got clients where they've got a very flexible portfolio. They stay in these sites for a short number of years, much shorter than an on-site project will probably pay back in. So one option is to look at whether the business would consider something like a virtual PPA, where so that would be an off-site option where they would engage with a developer on a site away from their estate, but agree to a financial commitment to taking or supporting that project and taking that power, but that would allow them to have the flexibility to continue to operate their estate as they normally would do. So you buy power from a wind farm, or financially support a wind farm, but you're still able to have flexibility in the way that you run your estate.
Thanks so much, Simon. And one more question, because I know we're slightly behind schedule. So the question is just about whether a on-site self-consumption project in the EU would typically generate guarantees of renewable guarantee of origin certificates, and can those guarantee of origin certificates then be traded? Do you know what the thresholds are in different member states?
Well, the simple answer is yes. The project will generate guarantees of origin. So so you would be able to trade those. I guess the question is that something that you would want to do if you've got your own if you've got a renewable energy target? Then by having your own on-site asset generating both power and certificates for you, you're taking you're securing those certificates into the future rather than having to go out onto the market and buy in what is becoming an increasingly volatile market. But if you haven't got a renewable energy target and you're just wanting to look to trade those, then I guess that is an option. But if you have a renewable target, I'd suggest you'd want to keep on hold of your own guarantees of origin.
Great, thank you very much. So now I suggest we move on to our second speaker of today's webinar, which is Karol Gobczynski from IKEA. Karol is the head of climate and energy at IKEA. We're just getting his slides on the screen now. And Karol is going to tell us a bit about IKEA's strategy in terms of on-site renewable energy sourcing. Karol, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Sonia. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So my name is Karol Gobczynski, and I'm leading the climate and energy at IKEA Group, the largest IKEA franchisee, formerly known as IKEA Group. And we committed to generate as much renewable energy as we consume until 2020. And until 2018, we generated equivalent of 81% of energy we use in our operations. And we believe in on-site generation, there is a massive potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and provide more affordable electricity on-site. And having said that, today we have installed 900,000 solar modules on our buildings, adding to 157 megawatt peak of capacity. And today, more than 50% of our buildings have on-site installations. And I would like today, during the webinar, share with you one of the examples. So this IKEA stores in Portugal have on-site PV installations, and they self-consume all the electricity generated, and this is equivalent of 25% of total electricity consumption within the store. And Portugal is a good example of the country where the changes within the national legislation enable the self-consumption for on-site installations and to increase the size of the installations, because that's a very important part. That legislation is defining what is the maximum capacity that can be installed for self-consumption. And solar panels are just one part of the building ecosystem. And for us, we are looking not only into the solar panels, but as well into energy efficiency, how we can save energy, and renewable heating and cooling, where we see the electrification of heating and cooling will play important part. And here the technologies are ground source heat pumps and air source heat pumps. And it's not only about energy, but as well the water consumption reduction, and heating up the water requires energy. So saving energy gives as well energy. Saving water gives energy reduction as well. EV chargers, what was mentioned briefly before, and this is part of this ecosystem. And then what we are not able to generate on-site, we invest in off-site installations, and we have as well 2 on-site turbines in Belgium and Denmark next to our buildings. And until today, we invested more than 2.2 billion euro in on-site and off-site installations. We directly invest in solar panels, since we own the majority of the buildings where we operate. And 75% of electricity itself self-consumed, around 25% it's sold to the grid. Our main focus is on the self-consumption, mainly due to the local regulations. Very often the regulation, if you would like to sell a surplus generated electricity to the grid, there are certain market barriers, and there is variety of the regulations where depends on the market. And today, majority of the installations are the rooftop installations. We have as well few installations on parking areas. And when we look on from the business model perspective as well, the amortization, it's very important point. And here there is a dependency, strong dependency from the local regulations. What is possible from the self-consumption perspective and selling surplus electricity to the grid. And solar radiation, where when we talk about solar radiation, this is more predictable in this case. And when we talk about main challenges, what we see as a main challenge, it's this, what I mentioned already before, the regulations that are defining very much the business case and profitability. And we see that there is enormous opportunity in on-site generation of renewable electricity if regulations are enabling to sell surplus electricity to the grid in simple way, so many people can do it. So it's not only about the companies, but as well individuals to be empowered to do it, to sell surplus renewable electricity to the grid in a simple way. And I will stop here, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Karol. That was very useful and a good case study of a business using on-site solar as part of its renewable energy sourcing strategy. I have one question. Could you say something about the extent to which, by generating electricity on-site, you are able to save money compared to the retail price of electricity you would usually pay in those locations? Is that a driver? To what extent does that vary from country to country?
Yeah, the variation between country to country it's quite big, and we see within some of the countries when you generate on-site renewable electricity and self-consume, you don't have any levies and any additional payments connected to that. When in some of the markets there is taxation and even you need to become energy company, energy trading company to be able to do it. So, and I would say that's the thing, that's the main challenge, that you need to understand the local legislation within each market to define the business case. But definitely there is a good business case on many markets, and I would say if you are starting, the first maybe point is to check what is the total overall electricity cost that you are paying in different markets, and then look what is possible from the legislation perspective to generate on-site and consume.
Great, thank you. One very simple question from the audience. What's the average capacity of your installation? So what's the average size of your rooftop installations on your stores?
Yeah, so there is a big variation. As I said, depends on the local legislation, and if we are able to sell surplus electricity, it can be up to 1 megawatt, and the smaller installations within Inca Group are like 100 kilowatt installed. So that's really few. But yeah,
Okay.
the average, if I would say, it's around probably 400.
So that gives people an idea. And someone in the audience is also asking, so who developed your plants? Did you develop them yourselves, or did you contract with a third-party EPC?
Yeah, we signed a frame agreement with the developers of the on-site installations, and then for specific markets or group of markets if the company is present on more than one markets.
Okay, another very specific question. Do you have any plans to put PV on your stores in Latvia?
As Inca Group, we don't have the store in Latvia, so it's difficult for me to answer this question.
Okay, never mind. And then how do you communicate these projects to the public, and I guess also to your customers? I mean, you're a B2C business. How do you go about communicating the PV that you have put on your stores to the customers and the wider public?
So I think that's the interesting case, because very often it's being said that on-site solar installations are visible, but in our case we see that they are not visible because they are on the rooftops. And however, we have communication in many of the stores, inside of the stores, explaining the installation that we use within the specific building. And as well, together with our off-site investments, we communicate our progress towards generating as much renewable energy as we consume until 2020. So we try to be quite vocal and share our experience, and that's what we see as part of our role to ask for bigger change when it comes to transition to low carbon economy.
Great, good to hear that. Just one note for the audience before we move to our last speaker. The slides for this webinar have already been uploaded to the GoToWebinar platform under the handout section. So if you want to access the slides, you can download them there in PDF format. Okay, so I suggest we now go ahead to our last speaker of today's webinar, which is Jochen Hauff, who is Head of Strategy, Energy Policy and Sustainability at BayWa Renewable Energy, also a member of the Board of Directors of SolarPower Europe. And he's going to talk to us about on-site generation and energy storage, which is another important technology to consider when building an on-site corporate sourcing strategy. So Jochen Hauff, over to you for the last presentation of the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, everyone, for attending and giving me the opportunity to talk about a bit more specifically maybe on options that we see on-site generation and more specifically also energy storage. It's part of the picture. We as BayWa RE are providing the entire spectrum of services, including PPAs and off-site topics. But for today, I'd like to focus on the on-site topic because we think it's an important element to boost the credibility. As Carol said, not always the visibility. Unfortunately, that's certainly something we need to think about, how to make it work and make it visible to customers. But still, it is an important element. We think in any corporate sustainability strategy, because it shows another set of commitment, and because, and that's important, I'll try to get to this as soon as I manage to skip the slide. Yes. So there are three points I want to make on why even dealing with on-site renewable generation and storage. Because one could say, if a corporation wants to be 100% or 80% or whatever your target is, powered with green energy, it's simple to just buy the power in a green format. So why would one bother with on-site? And the first one is the visibility, if we can make it visible, and the credibility, because it just underlines that we do what we can as a company to also provide a space for achieving national and global climate protection targets. So it is an element of underlining the credibility of that commitment. The second one is maybe a little bit more complex here. Implementing on-site energy is not simple. Carol mentioned the different regulation you need to become aware of and you need to grapple with. But also you need to, of course, look at your own energy demand, the structure of it, and it really is our experience that it shapes and promotes the internal discussion on what is the structure of our consumption, what do we really need. So if we think about generating on-site, we should first think about obviously becoming more efficient and reducing our overall consumption. So it sparks a dialogue, ideally a productive dialogue on the optimization of energy needs. And this can lead to energy efficiency improvements, and it can then lead to an increased awareness, increased transparency, increased data availability on energy consumption. And that alone is a benefit and is conducive to the goals of a sustainability strategy. The third point, last but not least, of course, there is economic motives here, and savings, revenues, and also additional functionalities and potential even products and ways to engage your customers are possible with on-site if you think this through. So the savings in terms of fees, surcharges, sometimes taxes, grid fees or grid tariffs are part of it. It's not only about receiving a certain set of subsidy, at least in many cases. So that's complicated, but it can also sometimes be profitable. It can be revenues if you manage to market some of your surplus potentially either on the weekends or whenever you don't need it, or if you manage to market flexibility. And this also brings us to the storage later. So there are revenue streams that are possible with on-site. So it turns it around. It's not only a question of energy procurement and sourcing. With on-site, you can become, as a company, also a producer of electricity, which you can then, at times where you don't need it, you can market it, or you can give it away, for example, to clients parked on a IKEA parking lot. I don't know if you do that, Carol, and want to charge their electric vehicle while they spend their money on billy shelves and so on. So this is another way of leveraging the benefits of on-site to other purposes that you could not do with a mere electric supply contract, maybe. So we think that's why on-site generation should always be an integral part of every green energy sourcing initiatives. It would be too little to only look at large-scale PPAs, but we also provide large-scale PPAs, so be our guest if that is what you need. Now, we as BayWa, we have partnered also with the resource platform here. We conducted a report. 1,200 respondents in 6 major European energy markets have confirmed what we hope they would say, that this is a topic for them. The topic of renewable energy is important to them, and their commitments are there also because they are there to raise the use of renewable energy and to also, of course, look in energy efficiency. They should do that first, but that is an important driver, and it is part of the picture of climate change protection, but also renewable energy targets, and sometimes and often combined with energy efficiency topics. So what I just described, that there is this link, shows that this also is exactly what the companies that we have surveyed here are looking for, or at least, as you see here, 66, 75, so 2/3 to 3/4 of companies of these 1,200 questioned are planning and have commitments in this area. So this is not a minority thing. This is not a niche. These are not just some weird green motivated companies. This is by far a majority of companies in Europe in the corporate and industrial space here. The options and the underlining the holistic view a little bit broader. And I think I already mentioned it in the example of IKEA. It is not only about power, or it is then about mobility. It goes to green heat and cooling solutions. So energy is, of course, broader than just power supply. And I've already mentioned the energy efficiency aspect of it, and the charging stations and possibilities for customers, but also, of course, employees and the own fleet of corporations, be that forklifts or delivery vans. These are elements that should be part of any green strategy. When do we make the switch? At what point does it make sense? And how can we then provide green energy to these vehicles? And of course, how do we organize the fleet management efficiently and get maximum efficiency out of the mobility aspects. The virtual power plant is connected with what I mentioned on the flexibility marketing. Can be a marketing perspective, can also be really a demand side management, avoiding peak tariffs, for example, for load peaks that you otherwise have to pay for. I'll get to that in a minute, and integrating your installations maybe in a network of neighboring installations or your company's installations to then have a combined offer with which you can purchase or market excess power to an electricity market. So also that is an option. We as BayWa RE are not only putting installations on the roof or building big wind parks. We also have an energy trading company based out of Germany, but dealing with the European markets where we have a market access and where we can help customers to purchase and structure their purchasing for their certain supply needs, but of course also the other way around. Any operator of small scale to large scale renewable energy plants, we can help them market their power on the wholesale market in forward curves or in longer term structured products if they wish to sell it wholesale or in the forward markets. Let me now dive a little deeper on the aspect of storage, just to maybe make this a little bit more tangible. If we always talk about the flexibility topic, and this is now a case, and we've calculated a few business cases for different clients here on peak shaving as a business case. And this is something where in the particular regulatory environment of Germany for small and medium and large scale businesses, there is a business case because the pricing structures for grid tariffs are such that if you hit or exceed a certain limit that is set and negotiated with your supplier only once a year, you will immediately be charged fairly significant and high charges. So any way to ensure that you stay beneath this and that you avoid this peak, that you shave the peak by having a battery capacity available that is designed to do that, can lead to significant cost savings already today. So without a significant additional subsidy or without that being now part of a subsidized scheme, we see amortization periods from 3 to 7 years for different use cases. They are highly specific. You couldn't say that in the food industry it always makes sense. Yeah, it is really a site-specific question and very much also dependent on your current connection capacity and supply contracts you have. Yeah, another application for batteries is the already mentioned electric mobility. So just putting up hyperchargers on the parking lot is not going to do it, because usually the load curves that are related to that, if your parking lot is full and your customers come and they appreciate the service of a free charging, or all your employees come and drive in the garage and they usually come around the same hour in the morning, if we then generate a massive peak, we will have a problem with our grid connection. Now this can be managed by just intelligence and say, okay, everybody just charges a tenth of capacity, and it will take 10 hours, but with that we can flatten this out. But then again, we have a little bit of lack of service, because the battery will hardly be charged if we down-regulate the capacity so much. So one way of addressing this, and a combination of measures, is and maybe to avoid an expensive strengthening of the grid connection, can be a buffer battery that would serve as a buffer to take away or to serve this peak in charging demand and help level out the strain on the grid. So we're, for example, we're building this now in front of our corporate headquarters in Munich. So we'll have 3 hyperchargers, including a battery, in order to gain more experience with this, and then also see, well, what can we do with this battery then at night when there is nobody charging there, because it's a corporate parking lot with only a few people working through the night, fortunately. So can we then use this battery in other times of the day for other purposes? Can we make a commercial business case out of this? So this is a little bit trial phase. It is hugely dependent not only on the different regulatory schemes in the different countries, but also on the evolution of these regulatory schemes. So all of this is in flux. And even though the RED II directive and what we now get from the European Union will help us in harmonizing it somewhat, and I think we from SolarPower Europe have contributed for there to be a more stable framework in the future. Nevertheless, we already see that every nation will have its very own interpretation. So this remains a field to be watched closely, and where some expertise is needed. Last but not least, obviously we have many design options to implement on-site. I think these have been mentioned already also in the first speech. And we think that fundamentally speaking, there are options to do it. It's not an ideal regulatory support yet. There is bureaucratic barriers. There is bureaucracy and red tape in the way. So it's clearly not a cookie. Baking cookies, or as simple as baking cookies here, but it's worth engaging in it, and it's getting better and better. So with that, I would like to end and gladly answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Jochen. That was a very useful overview of both the ability to use solar PV on site, but also the ability to then integrate that with battery storage and use that battery storage in smart ways as well. I want to ask you to say just a little bit more, perhaps on 2 points. Both you mentioned very briefly in your last slide the potential to do direct wire parks, solar parks, or near site projects. What are the options there? And also, you mentioned biogas. I just wanted to ask, we usually always talk about solar and wind, but of course there are other renewable technologies that could be used by corporates. Do you have any experience in corporate sourcing of electricity using biogas?
In fact, we do. We operate biogas installations, however, mostly on biogas methane feed-in. So we're actually selling the green gas to the market, which is then an option to green parts of the heat supply. Using biogas to create electricity has been a path that was popular in Germany and heavily subsidized. We don't really see this as a path that is very sustainable due to the high cost. So gas is better used for heat applications rather than electrification. And even though it was there are applications where it makes a lot of sense. That is especially if you have waste streams that you would otherwise have to dispose of. So if you do biogas because you, for example, in the food industry, have a waste stream that you would otherwise incur costs to dispose of or to burn, then fermentation makes a lot of sense and can also be in an unsubsidized fashion profitable. But here again, rather burn the gas rather than burn it in an engine and then electrify it again and then use it for electricity. I think that's a better division of labor. Your other question referred to direct wire, correct? So of course, everything I said here and on-site, near-site, I mean, this can be done in a near-site and then direct wire setting. So both your flexibility or your storage containers do not necessarily have to be in your cellar, but can be on a site near to you and can be connected. But the crucial thing is that right now, often everything that is behind the meter, meaning in your own deeply integrated with your own electricity, so then it would be in front of the meter, depending on where we look at it from. I mean, now looking from the consumer, it would be integrated in the own consumption. I think that's where on-site provides most value, yeah, and that can be off-site and on-site in the same way if it's close to your site and you actually a direct connection.
Great. Super interesting. We have two other questions that have come in from the audience. The first one is just questioning how economically viable battery storage really is, and saying, well, batteries are still very expensive. Prices are coming down, but batteries are still very expensive. But in your presentation, you suggested that the payback for battery storage in Germany can be between 3 to 7 years, if I remember correctly.
That's right.
So clearly, we're starting to see this really become very viable.
Well, yes, but to make a general message, I try to make it very clear. It's very, very case specific. Yeah, if you are in a situation, and usually these are the clients who then come to us, where because of certain peaks in your annual demand, you are actually pushed in a higher grid tariff bracket, and really avoiding these few occasions where you exceed certain limits would provide a significant financial benefit. That's where then an appropriately sized battery for that purpose can make sense. And these are examples that we calculated and where we get to such amortization periods. What does not make sense in Germany right now, in our experience, is a mere load shifting. Yeah, if you say, okay, my solar system produces a lot during the day, I don't need it all, I want to shift some of that consumption to and then to the night, and then I charge it again in the morning. This, by our calculations, in most cases, is not yet a viable solution in the commercial application. It is, however, viable for households because they have a very large incentive because of the high cost of end customer electricity, including all taxes and grid charges. There is a fairly high saving if they manage to increase their self-consumption share. So here for residential systems, smaller scale batteries also make sense in load shifting. For commercial industrial size, our experience is that currently it's in the peak reduction. And then if it's off-grid, then the key business case in Germany, for example, is in providing primary reserve capacities to the grid operator as the only viable business case.
Great. Okay, we're running out of time, but just one last question. Have you considered the economics for storage in Spain? Asks a member of the audience.
I'm sure somebody in my company has, but I haven't. And okay, so I would be hard pressed to say that. I'm sure, knowing that the retail or the commercial electricity prices in Spain are not insignificant. That and obviously the combination with a very economic solar system, it could make sense. But happy to put this to my colleagues. My email address is in the PDF that you can download.
Exactly.
So shoot me an email and I'll try to follow up on this.
I think that member of the audience should get in touch. Your email address is in the slides. Okay, that brings us to the end of our very informative webinar, looking at all the different options for on-site corporate sourcing for corporates. Just want to say thank you to all our panelists. Thank you to Simon, to Carol, to Jochen for your contributions today. Very, very informative. Just to remind you that on the 2nd and 3rd of October of this year, we're going to have another big event about corporate sourcing in Europe. The resource event in Amsterdam. So please do save the date for that. Tickets will go on sale soon, and that will be the opportunity to really go into much more detail on all these issues, and also to meet, for buyers and sellers to meet each other, and for those deals to happen. So please do put that in your diaries, 2nd and 3rd of October, Amsterdam. And all that remains is to thank you for participating in our resource platform webinar today. Thank you for your attention. We had over 100 people online, so thank you for that. Feel free to get in touch with any of the speakers with any additional questions, and we look forward to seeing you again at a future resource platform webinar. Have a great afternoon and have a great evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sonia.